HOA Karen cut my daughter's wheelchair ramp. She didn't know I'm a civil engineer. The sound hit me before the sight did, a hollow, splintering crack that made my stomach twist. When I ran out the front door, the world slowed to a nightmare frame. My daughter Lucy sitting at the top of the porch, tears streaking her cheeks, her wheelchair tilted, wheels scraping uselessly against a jagged edge of wood. The ramp I'd built with my own hands, gone. Cut clean in half like it was never meant to exist. "Dad, I can't get down," she cried, voice trembling, one hand gripping the splintered railing, and there she was. Her. Debbie Miller, the HOA president, standing across the street in her bright yellow blouse, arms folded like she'd just done a good deed. Behind her, 2 hired workers tossed the last of the ramp's panels into a truck. "I told you that ramp violated community aesthetics," she snapped, her voice echoing through the quiet morning. "We have rules for a reason." Rules. She said it like it was scripture, like compassion had to be approved by her signature. I felt my fists tighten, my pulse hammering in my ears. That ramp wasn't just wood and metal. It was freedom for my daughter. It was every ounce of love and every sleepless night I'd poured into giving her independence. Neighbors peeked through their blinds. No one said a word. Just silent judgment and fear, the kind that keeps people compliant under power. I walked toward Debbie slowly, the morning sun cutting through the dust between us. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," I said, voice low and shaking with rage. She smirked, not realizing she'd just picked a fight. With a civil engineer. And I build things that never fall. Before all this chaos, life in Willow Creek felt almost perfect. At least the kind of perfect you see in brochures. Rows of tidy lawns, flags on porches, kids riding bikes under golden evening light. The kind of neighborhood where every driveway looked the same, every mailbox shined the same way, and every family waved politely while secretly judging the others. I moved here thinking it was safe, peaceful, a place where Lucy could finally breathe again after the accident. Lucy was 8 when the drunk driver ran a red light and changed our lives forever. One moment, she was pedaling her pink bike, laughing at how fast she could go. The next, she was in a hospital bed, asking if her legs would move again. They never did. But she never stopped smiling. That smile became my blueprint for survival. I'm a civil engineer. Been one for 15 years. I design bridges, ramps, load-bearing structures. I understand stability better than I understand people. When Lucy came home from rehab, I decided I wouldn't just carry her up those stairs every day. I'd build her a ramp myself. Strong, sleek, ADA compliant, perfectly blended with the house. Every bolt, every angle, every polished railing was done with her freedom in mind. The day she first rolled down it, arms stretched wide like she was flying, I almost cried. She shouted, "Dad! I'm fast again!" That ramp wasn't just a structure. It was hope made visible. For a while, the HOA didn't bother us. I paid my dues, kept the yard trimmed, even attended a few neighborhood barbecues. That's when I first met Debbie Miller, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. Mid-40s, always dressed like she was running for office, smile sharp enough to cut glass. She had that voice, sweet on the surface, sour underneath. "Oh, you built that yourself?" she'd asked, fake admiration dripping from her tone. Must have been quite a project. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, like something about helping my daughter offended her sense of order. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she was just awkward. Maybe she didn't mean it. But little things began to change. The HOA newsletter started mentioning unauthorized exterior modifications. A note appeared in my mailbox. All structures must maintain neighborhood aesthetic consistency. Then came the casual comments from neighbors. "You might want to check with Debbie next time you make changes." You know how strict she is about symmetry. Still, I stayed polite. I thought reason could fix everything. Lucy's ramp was safe, stable, and technically legal. It didn't cross a property line or violate a single code. I even submitted the drawings afterward just to be sure. Lucy loved to sit at the bottom of the ramp in the evenings, feeding the stray cats or waving to delivery drivers. To her, that ramp was more than wood. It was her window to the world. To Debbie, it was apparently an eyesore. The tension built quietly. A sideways glare here, a snide comment there, but I didn't take it seriously. Not until I caught her standing at the curb one morning with a measuring tape, scribbling something on her clipboard. When she saw me, she smiled and waved like nothing was wrong. That was the first time I felt it, that uneasy chill under the surface of suburban peace. The kind that tells you your perfect neighborhood might be a cage with prettier bars. If I'd known then what she was planning, I would have never let Lucy roll outside alone again. It started with a letter, crisp, white and perfectly folded, sitting in my mailbox like a snake waiting to strike. The HOA seal stamped at the top, the kind of thing that makes your stomach tighten before you even read the words. Dear Mr. Harris, it has come to our attention that your property includes a non-compliant structure, which does not adhere to Willow Creek Community Aesthetic Guidelines Section 3A. Please remove or modify said structure within 10 business days to avoid further penalties. Regards, Debbie Miller, HOA President. I read it 3 times. Disbelief turning into slow-boiling anger. Non-compliant structure? They were talking about the ramp, the same one Debbie watched Lucy use every morning. I walked straight to her house that afternoon. Her front lawn looked like a magazine cover, trimmed hedges, white tulips, flags centered perfectly. She opened the door with that same polite smile that could slice through granite. Afternoon, Debbie, I said, holding up the letter. You mind explaining this? She tilted her head like she was addressing a child. Oh, that. It's just a standard notice. The ramp doesn't match the neighborhood's visual guidelines. You understand, right? We have to maintain consistency for property values. Consistency? I said, barely holding my tone. It's a wheelchair ramp. For my daughter, she gave a tiny shrug. We have elderly residents, too. Imagine if everyone just started building whatever they wanted. It's not personal, Mr. Harris, and it's policy. Policy. That word hit harder than any insult. She wasn't just attacking the ramp. She was sanitizing cruelty with paperwork. Over the next few days, things got worse. A few neighbors stopped saying hello. One even whispered, "You should have asked permission first." The HOA started sending reminder fines. $50 here, $75 there. They were testing me, wearing me down with bureaucracy. Lucy noticed, too. One night, as I tucked her in, she whispered, "Dad, did I do something wrong? Is it my fault?" My chest tightened. "Never," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Some people just forget what kindness looks like. Then came the second letter. Shorter, colder, final notice. Unapproved structure must be removed immediately. Non-compliance will result in community enforcement action. I laughed when I read it, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief turned to steel. I had followed every code, filed every permit. The ramp was more structurally sound than most driveways on the block. A few mornings later, I caught Debbie standing at the curb again, this time with 2 men in construction vests. She didn't even look guilty. When she saw me, she called out, "Just taking some measurements for our records." I stared at her, words trapped behind my teeth. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just a busybody. She was a tyrant with a clipboard, and she'd made up her mind long before any violation. The piece of Willow Creek had cracks forming beneath its perfect lawns. And Debbie Miller was about to find out that when you push an engineer's patience too far, he doesn't just fight back, he rebuilds stronger. The morning it happened was strangely quiet, the kind of silence that feels staged, like the world's holding its breath before something ugly happens. I was in the kitchen packing Lucy's lunch when I heard her scream. Not a playful shriek, a sharp, terrified one that made my blood go cold. I ran outside barefoot. The sunlight hit my eyes and then I froze. The ramp, the one I'd built, sealed, and reinforced with steel brackets, was gone. What was left looked like a battlefield. Shattered planks, twisted screws, sawdust scattered like ashes. The base of the ramp was cut clean through. The railing snapped in half as if someone had taken a saw straight to its heart. Lucy was stranded at the porch edge. Her wheelchair tilted dangerously. One wheel caught on a splintered board. Her hands shook as she tried to steady herself. "Dad, I can't get down." I lunged forward, lifting the chair before it tipped. My pulse roared in my ears. It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you. But my voice was shaking. Behind us, the street hummed with the faint sound of an engine. Then I saw it. A white contractor's truck parked across the road. 2 men were loading the last wooden panels into the bed. Debbie Miller stood nearby, arms crossed, phone in hand, directing them like a foreman. Her yellow blouse shimmered in the morning sun like a warning sign. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice cracking with disbelief. She turned, calm as ever. "Good morning, Mr. Harris, HOA enforcement. Your ramp was an unauthorized structure. We're correcting that mistake." "Correcting? You destroyed my daughter's wheelchair ramp!" She blinked, almost amused. "You were warned." "Multiple times. It was non-compliant. Unsafe, too. No certified contractor." My chest tightened, heat rising to my face. "Unsafe? I'm a civil engineer. That ramp was safer than your entire porch." Her smirk widened. "Rules are rules. Don't take it personally." Lucy burst into tears. "Why did she do that, Dad?" "I didn't hurt anyone!" I knelt beside her, fighting to steady my voice. "You didn't, baby. Some people just don't understand what compassion means." Debbie's workers tossed the last board into the truck, slammed the tailgate, and drove off, leaving sawdust and silence behind. The whole thing had taken maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. A few stood on their lawns pretending to water plants. No one intervened. Fear, politeness, apathy, whatever it was, it kept them quiet. I turned to Debbie, barely containing the storm building inside me. "You just committed vandalism on my property. I'm calling the police." She didn't flinch. "Go ahead. The HOA has full authority under community bylaws. You signed them when you moved in." She walked away, heels clicking, like she'd just ticked off another task on her to-do list. I stared at the ruined ramp, the jagged ends of my labor, the symbol of Lucy's independence reduced to debris. My hands trembled, fists clenching until my nails dug into my skin. Lucy's voice was barely a whisper. "How will I go to school now?" That question shattered something in me, because I didn't have an answer, not yet. But I swore then that I'd find one. As I carried her inside, my mind shifted from shock to calculation. Measurements, regulations, permits. I'd built things that withstood storms stronger than Debbie Miller's ego. But this wasn't just about wood and bolts anymore. This was war, and I don't lose wars. I designed them. The police came that afternoon. 2 officers, one young and unsure, the other older, seasoned, the kind of man who had seen enough suburban politics to recognize nonsense when it appeared. I explained everything, the letters, the warnings, the destruction. They took photos, wrote down statements. When I pointed across the street at Debbie Miller's house, the older cop sighed. "Let me guess. HOA dispute?" "HOA terrorism," I corrected. He rubbed his jaw. "Sir, I'm sorry, but unless you've got footage or eyewitnesses willing to testify, this'll go down as a civil matter. You can file in small claims court, but it's tricky when HOAs are involved." I almost laughed. "Tricky?" My daughter couldn't leave the house, and they called it tricky. The next day, I sent a formal complaint to the HOA board. 3 pages, photos attached, legal citations included. The reply came in less than 24 hours. "Mr. Harris, the ramp was deemed structurally non-compliant after multiple warnings. HOA board supports the enforcement action. Further appeals may be submitted through proper channels. Regards, Willow Creek HOA. Proper channels." The phrase dripped with smug bureaucracy. They didn't care about fairness, only power. That weekend, Lucy's teacher called, asking why she'd missed school. I lied, told her Lucy was sick. In truth, Lucy was sitting by the window staring at the broken planks stacked in our garage. She hadn't smiled in days. "Dad," she said softly one night, "can't we move somewhere else?" I looked around at the house I'd poured everything into. "Not yet," I said. "Some fights you don't walk away from. News travels fast in quiet neighborhoods. Within days, whispers replaced greetings. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street. At the community market, I overheard 2 women whispering, 'He's suing the HOA?' Over a ramp? Well, rules are rules. Debbie's just doing her job. That phrase, doing her job, burned through me like acid. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up. The room smelled of fresh coffee and self-importance. Debbie sat at the head of the table, pearls glinting under the fluorescent light. When I walked in, conversations died. "Mr. Harris," she said sweetly, "we weren't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't," I replied, dropping a folder onto the table. "Engineering specs, permits, ADA compliance forms, all approved by the county. Your removal wasn't just wrong. It was illegal." The board members exchanged nervous glances, but Debbie didn't flinch. "We'll have our legal team review your claims," she said, voice syrupy. "But I assure you the board stands by its actions." "Of course you do," I muttered. "You always do, until someone sues." Her eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat, Mr. Harris?" "No," I said calmly, leaning forward. "It's a guarantee." For a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, maybe. But she hid it fast. When I left that night, neighbors watched from their driveways. Nobody spoke. Nobody offered a word of comfort. In Willow Creek, silence was safety. That's when I realized the truth. Debbie didn't act alone. She controlled them through fear, gossip, fines, and fake smiles. And the HOA wasn't just a board. It was her weapon. Lucy's ramp had been her first target. I was next. That night, as the house creaked and the streetlights hummed, I opened my laptop and began digging. Building codes, ADA laws, HOA bylaws, every line, every clause, every loophole. I wasn't just an angry father anymore. I was a man designing a counterattack. Precise, quiet, unstoppable. Debbie thought she'd cut down a ramp. What she didn't know was that she'd just built the foundation for her own collapse. For weeks after the incident, the house felt smaller, not because the walls had moved, but because hope had. The ramp used to be Lucy's bridge to the world. Now it was just a pile of jagged boards collecting dust in the garage. Every time I walked past them, I felt something inside me splinter all over again. Lucy tried to be brave, but I could see her light dimming. The girl who used to sing while rolling down that ramp now stared out the window like she was trapped behind invisible glass. She'd ask questions I didn't know how to answer. "Dad, why do people hate us? Why can't we just make them understand?" I'd mumble something about fairness, about patience. But truthfully, I didn't believe my own words anymore. There's only so much injustice a man can explain before it starts corroding his soul. I spent my nights at the kitchen table. Papers spread everywhere, permits, letters, photos of the damage, searching for something that could make sense of it all. But the more I read, the more I realized how the system was rigged. The HOA's rules were written to protect power, not people. They could twist any sentence, hide behind any clause. Meanwhile, Lucy's health began slipping. Her physical therapist called, worried about her missed sessions. Getting her into the car was a daily battle now. Every bump, every curb felt like a punishment. I could carry her, but each time I did, it felt like I was carrying guilt itself. One night, after she'd fallen asleep, I walked outside. The neighborhood was silent except for sprinklers ticking rhythmically. Perfect, obedient, artificial. Debbie's house glowed across the street, neat and smug. I could see her silhouette behind the curtains, probably sipping her evening tea, content in her victory. My chest burned with helpless rage. I wanted to storm over there, to shout, to break something, and anything. But I didn't. I just stood there in the dark, fists shaking, breath unsteady. Because rage is useless without a plan. I looked at Lucy's darkened window and whispered, "I'll fix this, baby. I don't know how yet, but I will." Then I walked back inside, sat at my drafting desk, and stared at the blank sheet of paper in front of me. For years, that desk had been where I designed bridges. Strong, balanced, precise. Now I realized I wasn't just drawing structures anymore. I was sketching a blueprint for justice. But before I could build anything, I had to rebuild myself. And that was the hardest project of all. The next morning, something inside me shifted. The grief didn't disappear. It hardened, refined into purpose. I walked into the garage and uncovered the tarp. The sight of that splintered ramp didn't crush me this time. It lit me. Every broken piece whispered the same word, proof. That's when I remembered something. 2 weeks earlier, before all this chaos, I'd installed a small security camera above the porch light. A simple motion sensor setup, the kind of precaution every engineer loves tinkering with. I'd almost forgotten about it. Hands trembling, I rushed inside, logged into my laptop, and opened the camera feed history. Hours of static, wind, shadows, and then there it was. 13 a.m., a white contractor's truck backing up onto our driveway. 2 men stepping out, flashlights in hand, one of them wielding a power saw, and in the faint glow of their headlights, a figure in a bright yellow blouse, arms folded, watching. Debbie Miller. I froze the frame, zoomed in. Her face was clear as daylight. She wasn't just behind this, she supervised it. My heart pounded with a new kind of adrenaline. I copied the footage onto 3 USB drives, one for me, one for the police, and one for insurance. Then I went back outside and examined the damage again, but this time not as a victim, as an engineer gathering evidence, measurements, cut patterns. Saw marks. I could tell instantly this wasn't random destruction. It was deliberate, calculated. Someone had followed the ramp's load-bearing joints and weakened them before cutting, a job done with precision. Which meant she hadn't just broken the law, she'd hired professionals. That night, I drafted a full engineering report, diagrams, material specs, timestamps. By morning, I had a dossier thick enough to crush her aesthetic violation nonsense. But it wasn't just about winning anymore. Debbie had turned my daughter's pain into her trophy. And I wasn't going to play defense. I was going to make her explain publicly what kind of person destroys a disabled child's only access to freedom. A few days later, while dropping Lucy off for her online therapy session, I overheard a conversation between 2 neighbors at the fence. "Did you hear? Debbie's been pushing the HOA to ban outdoor ramps altogether," one whispered. "She says they ruin the uniform look." That was it, the final confirmation. This wasn't about me. It was about power. She wanted control, even if it meant taking it from the weakest person on the block. When I went back inside, Lucy was coloring a picture of our house, and she'd drawn the ramp back, painted gold, glowing under the sun. I smiled for the first time in weeks, because that drawing wasn't just art. It was a blueprint, a sign. Debbie thought she could erase us quietly, but I had proof, I had skill, and soon I'd have justice, measured, documented, undeniable. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something stronger than anger, clarity. She broke something I built with love. Now I'll build something she can't destroy, the truth. For the next 3 nights, I barely slept. Every screw, every line of code, every HOA clause ran through my mind like blueprints coming to life. This wasn't a brawl anymore. It was a structural project. And Debbie Miller had no idea she was standing on the fault line. I started by gathering every regulation, every building code, every ADA compliance clause that could bury her in facts. I called the county inspector's office, pretending to be a homeowner seeking clarity. When I mentioned a disabled access structure removed without permit, the man on the line paused. "Removed?" he said. "By who?" "By the HOA president," I answered. "Sir, that's not legal, not even close." Bingo. I took note of his name, badge number, and exact quote. Then I filed an official complaint, not to the HOA, but to the State Housing Commission. I attached my engineering report, the camera footage, and photos of Lucy's destroyed ramp. I wasn't fighting them in their playground anymore. I'd just moved the battlefield. While the paperwork moved, I began rebuilding, but this time, not quietly. On the first Saturday morning, I rolled out lumber and steel beams on my driveway. Lucy watched from the porch, wrapped in her blanket. "You're building it again?" she asked. I smiled. "Better, stronger. Legal in all 50 states. The sound of drills and saws filled the air. Within minutes, curtains fluttered open across the street. Neighbors peeked out, phones in hand. Debbie herself stepped outside, heels clicking like a metronome of arrogance. "Mr. Harris," she called, voice dripping with false authority. "You can't just rebuild without HOA approval." I turned, kept my voice calm. "Actually, I can. County inspector reviewed my plans this morning." Her expression faltered, just slightly. "You're bluffing." I handed her a printed copy of the ADA compliance code. Section 121.8. Any permanent accessibility modification for a disabled resident overrides aesthetic restrictions. You should have read it before you broke the law. The color drained from her face. She turned away, muttering something about lawyers. By the end of that weekend, the new ramp stood tall, reinforced with steel, weather-sealed, designed like a small architectural marvel. It wasn't just a ramp. It was a monument. But the real masterpiece was yet to come. I drafted an open letter, not emotional but surgical. Facts, dates, legal sections. And I attached the security footage, a single screenshot of Debbie supervising the destruction. Then, with one click, I posted it to the community Facebook group. Within an hour, comments exploded. Unbelievable. How could she do that to a child? I knew she was overstepping. By sunset, the post had over 500 reactions. Neighbors tagging one another, sharing, screenshotting. I didn't celebrate yet. I knew she'd come after me harder. But this time, I wasn't the man with the broken ramp. I was the man who'd built his defense out of concrete, evidence, and principle. And the best part? Every piece of that ramp, every photograph, every line in that report was designed not just for justice, but exposure. Because Debbie's biggest fear wasn't losing power, it was losing her image, and I'd just drawn the blueprints for her public collapse. By Monday morning, my post had become the wildfire of Willow Creek. What began as quiet whispers spread into open outrage. Screenshots of the footage, Debbie standing in her yellow blouse under the glow of a contractor's floodlight, were circulating through every HOA group chat, every parent forum, every local neighborhood thread. At first, she tried to control the damage. A new HOA announcement went out at 9 a.m. Do not believe the misleading video shared online. The HOA acted according to policy and with the community's best interests in mind. But by then, the comments section had already turned against her. Best interests? You destroyed a disabled child's ramp. Policy doesn't mean cruelty. I've had enough of your power trips, Debbie. Even neighbors who'd once stayed silent began speaking up. One posted, "She fined me $200 for leaving Halloween decorations up too long." Now this? Enough. The mask was cracking, and for the first time, Debbie wasn't the one controlling the narrative. That afternoon, I received a call from Officer Daniels, the same older cop who'd come to my house weeks earlier. His tone was different now. Serious, focused. "Mr. Harris, I've seen your footage. The department's reviewing it with the county attorney. Looks like this isn't just an HOA issue anymore." I leaned back in my chair, relief flooding in for the first time. "So she's finally in trouble?" "Let's just say she'll be answering some questions soon," he replied. That night, I attended the monthly HOA meeting, uninvited but very much expected. When I walked into the community hall, every chair turned. Debbie sat at the head of the table, her usual smile replaced by a tight, trembling line. The projector on the wall glowed with the HOA logo until I connected my laptop. The screen shifted to the paused video still. Debbie Miller, standing smugly as the contractors cut my daughter's ramp apart. The room went silent. "Play it," someone whispered, and I did. The audio buzzed softly, then came alive. The whir of the power saw, the crack of wood, Debbie's voice, cold and clear, saying, "Make sure it's all gone by sunrise." Gasps, murmurs. One board member stood up and walked out. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Debbie shot to her feet. "This is taken out of context. He's twisting." "Context?" I cut in, stepping forward. "My daughter couldn't leave our house for 3 weeks because of your decision. My ramp was legal. You broke the law, and you knew it." I opened a folder and dropped copies of my engineering report and the county inspector's findings onto the table. Each page landed like a hammer. "Here are your violations. Here's your permit fraud. And here," I said, pointing at the video still, "is your arrogance, documented in HD." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. Finally, Officer Daniels walked in, flanked by another uniformed officer. Debbie's face went pale. "Mrs. Miller," he said, calm and firm, "we have a few questions regarding property damage, misuse of HOA funds, and unlawful construction activity." The entire room erupted, some gasping, others clapping, others whispering, "It's about time." As they led her out, she turned to me, eyes sharp with disbelief. "You think you've won?" I met her gaze and said quietly, "No, I think my daughter just got her justice." The crowd didn't cheer. They stood in stunned silence. Because in that moment, for the first time in years, the tyrant of Willow Creek had fallen, and I hadn't needed anger to defeat her, just truth, precision, and a camera. The next morning, the sun rose over Willow Creek with a strange kind of silence. The quiet that follows a storm, when everyone's waiting to see what's left standing. For the first time in months, I felt no fear opening my front door. The ramp gleamed under the morning light, sturdy and proud, while across the street, Debbie Miller's perfect lawn looked smaller, duller, somehow ordinary. By noon, my inbox, flooded with messages from reporters, neighbors, and local advocates. The story had leaked. HOA president destroys disabled child's wheelchair ramp. Faces investigation. It spread faster than wildfire. Local news trucks lined the street by evening. Lucy watched through the window, clutching her stuffed bear. "Dad, are they here because of us?" I knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart. They're here because of what she did, and because people finally care." That afternoon, the county inspector arrived with Officer Daniels. Debbie stood on her porch, still wearing her bright yellow blouse as if refusing to admit defeat. Her lawyer, a tall man in a dark suit, whispered furiously in her ear. "Mrs. Miller," Officer Daniels called out, "you're under investigation for property destruction, permit fraud, and endangering a disabled minor." Debbie's voice trembled. "This is absurd. I was following community policy." The inspector held up my engineering report. "No, ma'am. You were breaking state and federal law. ADA compliance overrides HOA aesthetic codes, and you falsified safety claims." I stepped forward, calm but unflinching. "You said I was breaking the rules, Debbie. Turns out you never even knew what the rules were." The cameras caught it all. The flash of disbelief on her face. The desperate attempt to compose herself. The forced smile cracking under pressure. "You think this makes you a hero?" She spat. "You humiliated me in front of the whole neighborhood." "No," I said softly. "You did that yourself. I just built the foundation you stood on." And then kicked out the support. The officers escorted her toward the car as reporters shouted questions. "Did you authorize the destruction, Mrs. Miller? Do you have a statement for the family? Will you resign as HOA president?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her silence was louder than any confession. When the car pulled away, the crowd that had gathered outside began to applaud, not loud or mocking, but steady and sincere. Some of the very neighbors who'd looked away before now approached me one by one. "Mr. Harris, I'm sorry," one woman said. "We should have spoken up sooner," another man added. "You stood your ground. You made us realize how wrong this place had become." I nodded but didn't gloat. I wasn't interested in victory parades. Justice, real justice, doesn't need cheering. It needs change. That night, as Lucy wheeled down the new ramp under the soft glow of our porch light, she looked up at me and smiled, that same fearless smile I hadn't seen in weeks. "It's even better than before," she said. "It's unbreakable this time," I replied, but she shook her head. "No, Dad, you're unbreakable." Her words hit me harder than anything Debbie ever said. I realized this wasn't just about rebuilding a ramp. It was about teaching Lucy that dignity doesn't need permission. The next morning, I got a call from the local paper. They wanted to feature our story, and not as gossip, but as a reminder of how easily power can twist ordinary rules into cruelty. I agreed, on one condition. They include Lucy's words at the end. The article went viral nationwide within 48 hours. Civil engineer fights HOA tyranny, builds ramp, builds justice. Comments flooded in. People sharing stories of their own battles with HOAs, bullies, and bureaucracy. For the first time, Lucy's story wasn't one of pity, it was one of pride. And as for Debbie, the HOA board removed her by unanimous vote. Her name disappeared from the newsletters, her fines voided, her power stripped. Standing on that ramp one evening, watching the sunset burn gold across the sky, I thought about everything she'd taken, and everything she'd given back without meaning to. She'd destroyed a structure. But in doing so, she'd built something stronger, a community that finally saw, and I, the man she tried to humiliate, had only one thing left to say. Not to her, but to anyone who ever stood silent while someone suffered. Never let cruelty hide behind rules, and never let fear stop you from building what's right. Because the truth is, I don't just build ramps. I build foundations that outlast people like her. The week after Debbie's arrest, the air in Willow Creek changed. The street that once carried whispers now felt lighter, like the neighborhood had taken its first real breath in years. The tension was gone. No more letters in mailboxes. No more silent stares. The same neighbors who used to cross the street now waved again, sometimes stopping to say, "We're glad you stood up, Mike." I didn't hate them. Fear makes people small. Debbie fed that fear, controlled it with fines and bylaws. But now that she was gone, people were waking up from the trance. One evening, as Lucy rolled down her new ramp, the sunset painted her in gold. The ramp glowed against the light like something holy. She turned, smiling wide. "Dad, can we invite the neighbors' kids to race with me?" I laughed. "Sure, but don't blame me when you win." She giggled, that same bright bell-like laugh I thought I'd lost forever. The new ramp had become a symbol. Kids rode their scooters down it. Elderly neighbors came by just to look. Even the mailman complimented it. "Strong work, sir. Looks like it'll last longer than this whole street." Sometimes at night, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and look across at Debbie's dark house. For sale signs now stood in her perfect yard. The windows were black, lifeless. Power gone. But I didn't feel triumph. Just quiet closure. In the weeks that followed, I spoke at 2 community meetings, one about accessibility, another about HOA reform. I showed them Lucy's story, the footage, and the simple truth that rules mean nothing without humanity. People listened, really listened, and Lucy, with her small, confident voice, told the local news reporter, "My dad builds things that don't fall, even when people try to break them." That line stayed with me. Because she was right. Not about me being strong, but about what we build from pain. I realized that revenge hadn't brought me peace. Rebuilding did, standing tall when you're expected to crumble. That's the real victory. That night before bed, I checked on Lucy. She was asleep, her hand resting on her sketchbook. On the open page, she'd drawn our ramp again, this time with flowers climbing up its railings and sunshine pouring over it. Underneath, in her handwriting, she'd written, "Home isn't walls. It's people who care." I smiled, turned off the light, and whispered to the dark, "You're right, sweetheart. You're absolutely right." Because in the end, the ramp wasn't just her freedom. It was our reminder that when cruelty tries to cut you down, you rebuild stronger, wiser, and higher than before. And maybe, just maybe, even the people watching will learn how to build again, too. A month later, life found its rhythm again. Not the one we had before, but something better. Lucy's ramp now gleamed silver under the morning sun, polished smooth, lined with flower boxes she painted herself. Every time her wheels rolled down it, I felt something heal inside me. The story didn't end with Debbie Miller's downfall. It started something bigger. Our neighborhood rewrote its HOA bylaws, adding a clause for accessibility and compassion compliance. The same neighbors who once hid behind closed curtains now showed up at meetings, demanding fair treatment for families like ours. And somehow, I became the guy they called when they needed advice on how to build, not just ramps, but solutions. One Saturday, as I worked on fixing a neighbor's railing, Lucy rolled up beside me holding 2 lemonades. "You're always building something, Dad," she said, smiling. I grinned. "Guess it's what I do," she tilted her head. "Even people?" That one caught me off guard, but she was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped building just structures. I'd started rebuilding trust, decency, community. The story of the HOA ramp case made the local paper again, this time not as a scandal, but as a lesson. The headline read, "One father's ramp rebuilt more than wood, it rebuilt a neighborhood." Standing there, coffee in hand, I reread that line until the words blurred. It wasn't pride I felt, it was peace. Real peace. That evening, I sat on the porch while Lucy played with her friends. The sky burned orange, the same color it had been the day I thought everything fell apart. Only now it felt different, softer, forgiving. Lucy's laughter carried through the air, echoing down the street where fear used to live. The ramp stood behind her like a monument to resilience. I took a deep breath and looked straight into the fading light, whispering more to myself than anyone else. You can break what I build, but you can't break why I built it. And that's when I realized every story of cruelty, every abuse of power, every moment that tries to silence love or dignity, only wins if we stay quiet. So to everyone who hears this story, don't stay quiet. Speak, build, defend what's right, even if it costs you comfort, because justice doesn't start in courtrooms or board meetings. It starts right on your front porch, when you decide enough is enough. And if you believe that too, but subscribe. Stand with us and let's keep building what no one can tear down. Hope, justice, and the courage to care.